Hello, my name is David with Winning Solutions. We hope this video will be all the help you need. Are you trying to create an Access database, but find that it's too much work, or you could be doing something more productive with your time? WSI can do all the hard work for you. Just contact us via the information below this video. We will work with you to determine how much time and money will be needed to build your new database. If you'd prefer to have your database built with .NET, Microsoft SQL Server, so you can run it on your Windows desktop or anywhere in a web browser, we could do that too. So you want a new database, or you need a new database for your business. That's great. It's an important part of any business, is keeping track of your data. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to talk you through some things you want to think about when you're starting a new database and ways that you might go about creating it. So you need a new database for your organization. There's a few questions, there's many questions that you'll probably ask or have in mind, and you can only scratch the surface here. Should you build it in Access or .NET? So Access, Microsoft Access is part of Microsoft Office, very familiar, that's the main advantage. .NET, when we refer to .NET, basically what we're referring to is a method we use, or a language or a set of tools that we use to create a database application that is accessed not through an application like Access, but through a web browser. So .NET is one of many technologies used for creating web-based databases, but it's the one that we use here at Winning Solutions. Now, in terms of who's going to build this and how is it going to be built? Now, the question, of course, is, do you know Access already? Do you know Access? And of course, you could know Access just in terms of the data and tables part. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to know the programming end of it, because there's two real aspects to it. There's the data and there's the application. We're going to talk about splitting databases in a little bit. But the question is, do you know Access already? If so, do you know the programming part of it, which is VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications? Do you want to do some or most of the programming yourself? We're very flexible in terms of how you could do that. You can certainly try it yourself. You can have a professional developer do it. One thing that we can do here at Winning Solutions is we have an in-between option where we can coach you through the process. If you know enough of Access to at least be familiar with tables and stuff, we could take you through the programming end of it. There are some other considerations you have to think about. How many users will you have? And where are those users located? In other words, I don't mean like what state are they in, but are they all in the office? Do you have multiple locations? Especially these days, are these users going to be accessing the application from home? Are they remote? Are they out in the field? Do they need to access it over the internet? Those are types of things we need to consider. And of course, which kind of feeds into our last point, do you need remote access to your database from outside of your office or business or store? So first of all, Access or .NET. So should it be an Access, a Windows application in Access, or should it be a web application in .NET? That's really going to depend on your situation. There's no one-size-fits-all. Access is okay, I would say, for most situations. Access databases can handle several users. It can't handle an infinite number of users, and it can't handle an infinite amount of data. If you're accessing your database over a network, a local area network or a wide area network, in other words, you have computers that are networked together. We're not talking about the internet. We're talking about having several computers in an office that are connected to each other or connected through a common server. That type of thing, Access can still be used. Where we run into issues is if you need to have the database hosted over the internet. So in most cases, Access will work fine, but if you have a lot of remote users, you may want to consider having a .NET database or even a hybrid model. We do, no matter what, recommend splitting the database, and I'll talk about what that is in just a moment. The only time we don't recommend splitting databases, which basically is having the application in one file and having the data in another file. Basically having two. If it's an access, you're talking about two different database files. One for the programming, and one for the forms and the reports and the queries, etc., and another one for the data tables themselves. We generally recommend doing that unless you're a single user on a single computer, and we have another set. We have some videos that we've done regarding splitting databases, so I won't get into that in too much detail here. I'll link down below to our splitting database video. A web-based solution written in Microsoft.NET might be a better option if you want to have remote access from almost anywhere, in other words, through a web browser. But even through a web browser, .NET is not the only option. We'll get into that in a little bit too. So what is splitting databases? Well, basically, we want to talk about two things. It's splitting a database into a front end and a back end. And a front end is where the user interface is. It's where the app is. It's where the action takes place, right? Forms, queries, reports, buttons, all of those types of things is the front end. That's the user interface, the user interaction. The back end refers to where the tables themselves are stored. Where is the data itself? On a very, very rare instance will you need to access the back end. That's in an ideal situation. The system is constructed in a way that you should never, under any circumstances, need to open the back-end database. Certainly if it's an SQL Server. But even if the back-end is another Microsoft Access database, that's still not recommended. So generally the front end is all you're really going to see in terms of when you're using it. Now, there are options. You can use Access for the front and back ends. You could have an Access front end, and for larger databases, you might want to put the back end on something other than Access, a server solution such as SQL Server. If we're dealing with a web application, then that web application will almost inevitably have an SQL Server back end. Of course, it doesn't have to be limited to SQL Server. There are other products which you may have heard of, such as Oracle. But at Winning Solutions, we are a Microsoft shop, so if we work on it, it's going to be using .NET and SQL Server, which are Microsoft technologies, even though there are other options. Now, the back end or the data tables, again, they could be housed locally in Access, or they could be on a separate server using Microsoft Server, so Microsoft SQL Server. So, the data tables can even be on the same computer as the front end, although that's really not recommended, because the whole point of splitting a database, and I didn't really get into this, but the whole point of splitting a database is that so the user interface is separated from the data. If the database is going to be accessed by multiple users or from multiple computers, you certainly don't want everyone having their own copy of the data, because then you do one person does one change to a record, the other person does another change to that same record, and now that the data is out of sync, they're incompatible. That's certainly a very bad situation. So in all but the very, very simplest situations, we almost always recommend splitting, except for there are always some exceptions, but almost always we're going to want to split the database. Okay, we have a tutorial dedicated to splitting databases, so I'm going to leave that discussion right there. Now, in terms of the back end, so we're presuming a split at this point. So that back end where the tables are, that can remain in a separate Access file, or it could be on SQL Server, and there are ups and downs to both of these. Access is certainly a more user-friendly interface, and by the way, I should reiterate what I said before. Very rarely will you have, as a user, or at least very rarely will the user have any need to open or access the back end. That is something that is going to remain, or should remain, almost completely invisible to the end user. So for the end user, from an end user standpoint, it doesn't really make a difference. Of course, with large databases, it's certainly going to be they'll notice a speed difference. Access is going to be much slower. So, I mean, from that standpoint, but I mean, generally, the user's not going to be opening up back ends. You're only going to be interacting with the front end. So this really comes down to, it comes down to how many users, how big is your database. The database splitting process is very straightforward with access. And also the data can be hosted on any computer or server at your business. Again, it has to be a PC or Mac with Microsoft Access. It has to have a compatible version of Microsoft Office installed. Most versions of Microsoft Office and Office 365 have access. There are a few versions of Office that don't. Student Edition or Home Edition may not have access included, but most of them do. Now, the other alternative is SQL Server. Now, Access databases have a size limit of 2 gigabytes. That's a hard limit, and even getting close to this, you could get very big slowdowns, especially if you're accessing data over a network. If the front end is on a local computer and the back end is on a network, which is what we recommend, this can really slow down. SQL Server can handle more complex queries. A query is just a way of looking up data, and queries can be done more efficiently on SQL Server. It's a system it's designed to hold databases up to several terabytes in size or more. So it's designed for crunching a lot of data very quickly. Access isn't. So SQL Server databases can be logged onto or accessed through the internet. The internet is not really possible for Access databases. At least, if you're going to access if you're going to get into an Access database, you have to have access to the computer where it's installed. It has to be on a PC or Mac. Like I said, it's got to have Microsoft Office installed. It's a little less flexible in that sense. And of course, data must be migrated from the original Access database. Now, that's true no matter what, whether you use Access or SQL Server. It's mostly straightforward. The process of migrating data or upsizing, going from Access to SQL Server, the process is mostly straightforward and automated, but we can sometimes encounter difficulties, especially we find with dates and things like that. Sometimes it can get a little messy. Depends on how healthy the underlying database or the original database is. Okay, so in terms of building the application, the front end, so we've already talked about where the data is stored. Now, do you know Access already? Do you want to do some or most of the programming yourself? Now, if you don't, it's not a problem. You could always hire someone. We could do the work for you. Or if you want to do some or all of the programming yourself, we can coach you through the process. And this is something that I personally have done with several clients where, I worked with one client who doesn't know Access but does know Excel very well. And so, he knew the ins and outs of tables, just didn't know the program. And he knew VBA, the programming language, just for Excel, not for Access. And so, it was a situation where I could walk him through things. Now, of course, will this save you money? Well, in the short term, probably not, because if we're doing the work for you, we're going to go through it much quicker than if we're kind of, hand-holding through it. It's generally going to be a slower process. But of course, if you're going to be doing a lot of maintenance and a lot of updates to the database in the long run, then it could save you money because you won't need as much help later on. So, it's push and pull. Sometimes you just have to make that evaluation. Now, how many users and from where are they accessing the database? This is another thing we touched on earlier. Now, the simplest situation is if you have either one user or you have multiple users and you're all together in the same office. You have a fairly robust PC network. We can, with a small enough database, and again, 2 gigabytes is pretty large. Unless you're using something like images, attachments, you're probably not going to get to that size very quickly. So you can probably get away with just having an Access backend on a local server, copies of the front end on individual computers. We don't recommend accessing the front end over a network because that kind of defeats the purpose of separating the interface and the data. If you're going to use if you're all going to use the same interface, kind of defeats the purpose, and it's generally not recommended. As I said, splitting is recommended in almost all cases. Now, are your users in multiple locations? Do they need to access the database remotely from outside the office? Now, a VPN is one way you could do that. I mean, Microsoft Windows comes with a tool called Remote Desktop, where you can use a remote computer as if it's your local computer. You have access to the desktop, and if Access Office is installed and that's where the database is, you can access it that way. So you can do it directly over a network. An Access database can handle several users over a LAN, WAN. Again, LAN is local area network. WAN is a wide area network. It's kind of like a LAN, except it might be over a larger geographical area. So even if you're in different locations, the access could still work. Otherwise, if your users are out in the field, you need to access the database through the web. A web-based solution written in .NET or C. .NET is not a language itself, but it's really a technology comprising multiple languages. That might be a better option. You might also use an Access .NET hybrid, maybe for administrators in the local office, people managing the database. They'll have their nice little user-friendly interface, access interface, and people using it in the field might use a .NET. You can make fancier interfaces generally with Access. That's the advantage. .NET applications, the main drawback to having the application in .NET is that the interface takes longer to create. It's probably going to be more hours, and more hours is going to be a higher cost. So, you have to kind of weigh those possibilities. There is a new possibility, and that is using the Access database through a web browser. This is a technology that we here at Winning Solutions are embracing, and we're starting to use it. We have a client that we're working with right now where they access an Access database through a web browser. It's a technology that is up and coming, and so that could be an option. It's certainly a lower cost option than a .NET database. Of course, you would need licensing to run the server software to run it. And also another caution is that an Access database accessed through the web may not have 100% of the functionality. There are certain, I don't want to get into too many details here, but there may be certain functionalities available while using that database locally that are not available while using it through a web browser. So it's not 100% guarantee, and we'd have to look at your individual needs before we recommend that. Okay, so in conclusion, the advantage of Access databases, they're relatively easy to build. If you have limited programming experience, they come packaged with most versions of Microsoft Office. You could build one on your own. You could build it with professional help, and that's what we specialize in at WSI. Or you could have a professional do all the work. It's going to depend on your situation, and part of our consulting process is we go through these options with you. Doing it yourself might save you money in the long run, although it might cost more in the short run because it's going to be a slower process. Databases should usually be split into front and back ends. The front end is the application, the back end is the data, and it can be hosted either in a separate Access database or on an SQL server or on a different server technology. And, so there's a lot of factors we're talking about here. How do you design the front end? Where do you put the back end? Do you have a back end? Are you going to design it yourself? Is it going to be in .NET or Access? There's a lot of things to consider here. And one of the things we do really well here at WSI, besides programming databases, is we can walk you through the entire process and figure out what works best for your individual situations. That's a nice thing about having customized solutions that we develop here is that we can deliver a solution that's customized just to your needs, and you simply can't beat that.
Thank you for watching. We hope this video was all the help you needed for your Access database. If you are struggling to create an Access database that does what you need it to do and just want someone to make that happen for you, that is the business we are in. Our contact information is below the video. You can reach out to us and we will work with you to determine how long it will take and how much it will cost to get your database up and going. If the time and cost are acceptable to you, WSI will get to work and make your database vision a reality. Perhaps Microsoft.NET or MS SQL Server would be the better choices for your new database, so it can run on your Windows desktop or anywhere in a web browser. WSI will help you make this determination if you like. Again, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.